radio is reinventing itself or trying to reinvent itself, because we are in a time now where, as consumers, we like to engage in content when we have time, not when that content is there.
Welcome to the podcast about communication in business. I'm your host, George Torok. Did you know that I'm known as the speech coach for executives? Because I help business leaders deliver the intended message for greater success. And we do that through one-on-one coaching or group training for the team. When you listen to this podcast, you will hear insights and advice from communication experts from around the world. My guest today is Carl Richards. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Carl. 1, he has spent more than 25 years behind the microphone, on radio and on stage, entertaining and influencing audiences worldwide. 2, he's a 3 times best-selling author, international speaker, TEDx speaker, and MC, podcast host, and is the founder and CEO of Podcast Solutions Made Simple. And 3, he helps coaches, consultants, and other subject matter experts become the go-to expert and elevate their credibility by launching world-class podcasts. And here's an extra fact. Carl lives with his spouse in Gananoque, Ontario, where he enjoys camping and boating in the Thousand Islands. And when you really have a slow day, you go out there to start counting and probably never get quite to the 1,000. Carl Richards, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Oh, George, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. Did you know there's more than 1,000 islands in the Thousand Islands?
I didn't know that. So somebody rounded down instead of rounding up.
Math is hard. That's what I always say. It's something like 1,800, and there's an actual definition of what an island is. And I know that's not what this show's about. But anyways, it's just food for thought there. But you're right. When you live in these parts, you don't necessarily go count the islands, but you know the ones you want to go to on a regular basis and check out for sure.
And yes, it's a beautiful sight. I've been on the cruise through the islands there, and no, I didn't. I'm sure we didn't see all 1,000, 1,800. Carl, you've been in the broadcasting business for a good portion of your life. So you've seen, and you've been both a guest but most importantly, you've been a host, producer in radio. And with all the podcasting happening, people might forget that radio's still around. It's certainly not as strong, as prevalent as it used to be. There have some radio stations that have closed around here, and it's always sad for that to happen. However, it's still a dominant, it's still relative and important to getting your message out. And people might think, well, radio's just like podcasting. And when someone says that to you, what do you say?
Well, it's not totally wrong. It's very similar. I actually had a coach who referred to podcasting as the new version of radio, especially with podcasting when it started out in its infancy stage as being audio only. Now, of course, podcasting is audio and transcription, and it's SEO, and it's all kinds of stuff that wasn't even a thought back when podcasts first came out. But there's this thought that, okay, well, podcasting and radio, they're kind of the same thing. They're different. Radio is, at least the radio that you and I grew up with, is what we refer to as streaming. You turn on the radio, you listen to the 7:30 news at 7:30. You wait for a specific time you don't even know when your favorite song is coming on. You wait and you wait and you wait and you hope that it comes on while you're listening to it. You know that contests run at a certain time, all of those things that make it a streaming type service. Whereas podcasting, unless you're doing live podcasting, which there are people who do that, I don't recommend it. But podcasting is more on demand. In other words, I can listen or watch. If you're watching podcasts, this being 2025 at the recording of this episode, you might be watching, but you can engage with your host. In this case, it'd be you, George, whenever you have time. You don't have to wait for a specific time for George to be there. Now, the only thing you might have to wait for is for George to post new content. So if you know George posts every week at, I don't know, every Tuesday at 8:00, I'm just picking this out of my head here, then okay, new content drops then. But it's on demand versus streaming. And that's, I think, where radio is reinventing itself or trying to reinvent itself, because we are in a time now where, as consumers, we like to engage in content when we have time, not when that content is there. That's why everyone PVRs things on their television, or if they're still watching television, or they're engaging platforms like Netflix or those other streaming services, or those other services rather, to engage in the content that they want when they want it.
And that gives the podcasting a strong advantage, because going on a long car trip, just line up your podcast and listen to a series, or commuting to work. You've got 20 minutes, 35 minutes. You can listen to your podcast, maybe all of it or part of it. And it's when you want. Now, working and you help people produce podcasts for your clients. When you meet with your clients and you discover that they think they want to have a podcast, where do you start? Where do you start the conversation?
At the very beginning. I know that sounds like, really? You start at the beginning? No kidding. But some people come in with this preconceived idea. I want a podcast. I want it to be big and brash and bold, just like, I'm going to name drop here, just like Joe Rogan. I want a show like that. Well, that isn't the beginning for most people, right? Because let's face it, there's a guy who has years of experience, or we could pick anybody. We could pick Oprah Winfrey, John Assaraf, any of those big names, Tony Robbins, anyone who has that kind of content out there. They have done things that have allowed them to have that credibility already. So we start at the very beginning and we say, okay, great. What's your show going to be about? And ironically, George, some people haven't figured that out yet. They just think, or they've had a coach tell them, you should get a podcast going. You're at this point in your business where you should start a podcast. And they go, oh, okay. But we will do a little bit of a dive and figure out, okay, what's the show going to be about? Do you have a working title even for it? Not that the title is important at that point, but what's your show going to be about? What's the goal of the show? Like, what's the purpose of the show? And what do you want out of it? Is the show that you're using to, for example, do you want more clients? Are you using your show to get more clients into your business? Are you using it to promote your passion project? A lot of people will do that. We have shows where we've helped people promote various passion projects. Are you using it to leverage joint venture partnerships? Are you using your show because you're a hobbyist? Most hobbyists we don't work with, because there's a fairly large investment to work with us, but we'll at least be able to point them in a direction. So what's the purpose of the show? That's where we start, is figuring out what's the goal? Where do you want to take this? And how do you envision this coming together?
And Carl, have you found that it is okay if one starts with one goal in mind and then adapts or adjusts as they go? Absolutely.
I even think back to my podcast when I started it in 2019. I was still doing speaker training. I was still working in radio, had a part-time business doing speaker training. So my goals back then for the podcast were to elevate my experience and credibility as a speaker trainer to not only get more clients in the door, but ideally to take my business full time. And I figured out eventually that this was the way to do this. Well, now I'm in a completely different, not completely different, but I'm in a slightly different business. I'm not a speaker trainer. I bring those skill sets to the table for my clients, but it's not the main focus of my business. We're elevating clients, brand, business, and credibility through podcasting. But now it's about podcasting. What's the industry like? What are some tips and tricks or advice if you're an experienced podcaster or a new podcaster, or you want to know where podcasting is going? That's the kind of content now that we're bringing to the podcast. So very different from saying, here's how you do gestures. Here's how you command the stage and get the audience to basically eat out of the palm of your hand, which is what I used to do when the podcast was about speaker training. So yes, you can shift. And I actually encourage podcasters to number one, launch your show. You don't know how it's going to land until you launch. And 6 months or a year in, probably a year, after 6 months, you're still a fairly new podcaster. After a year, that's probably a good time to assess, do I need to make a change? Is there something I need to shift up? Do I need to change formats? We haven't even talked about that, but do I need to bring in more guests? Do I need to not have guests? All kinds of different things that at about the year mark, if you haven't done it by the time a year rolls around, consider doing it around that time. So yes, you can.
And what I'm hearing there, Carl, is that it's okay thinking you're heading in one direction, and then partway down the road, maybe you need to make a left turn here or focus on this. And it's okay. It doesn't mean that what you did before was wrong. This means that you're learning as you go.
100%. Let's face it, when most people start their podcast, number one, they don't have a lot of experience. This is not to toot my own horn, but I have 25 years in speaking and communication and broadcasting where I can think on my feet like this. I bring that to the table when I launched my show. Most people are coming to their podcast as a business owner. Even if they're experienced speakers, they might not be experienced with digital content like this. So there's those, they always say those first 10 episodes, they're probably your worst episodes. They really are. If I can say this on your show, they suck, right? But you're going to learn and become a better host as you go. So of course it's okay to pivot, and you will get better, and you will learn, and you will discover, oh, okay, this type of show works very well if I'm speaking to these kind of guests, but maybe this kind of content isn't where I should be going. Or you get an idea. I actually got this idea from a coach of mine. She said, well, and it's something that she was doing on her show. She started doing hot seat coaching. And I thought, that's kind of cool. I could actually do hot seat coaching on my show. I haven't done it yet, but I could, for example, do hot seat coaching. So there's many different ways that this can be approached. The biggest challenge is, and George, you probably can relate to this, in podcasting, there are no rules. The expression, the sky's the limit, is so true. Even beyond the sky is the limit. So there are no rules. There are some suggestions, but even with how long an episode should be, there's no hard and fast rule that says it has to be 10 minutes or 15 or 30 or an hour. There's no hard and fast rule. Unlike other mediums, unlike other media, rather, where there are rules. Like I said, 6 o'clock news starts at 6, not 6:05. And it runs for 30 minutes or an hour, not 2 hours. So those rules don't exist the same way in podcasting as they do in other media.
If a person came to you saying, Carl, I've got an opportunity to appear on a radio show, what advice would you give to them to get ready for it? And
don't do it. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do it. Get on a podcast instead. But no, I would say here's one of the things I would want to know. I would want to know, is this really appropriate for my brand, my business, and my credibility? That's number one. If it's just the opportunity to get on the radio or get on a community television channel, I would ask myself those questions. The second thing I'd ask myself, George, is my audience there? And maybe that kind of goes along with number one, but the second thing is my audience there? Is my audience tuning into this type of programming? If yes, then by all means, go on. The third thing I would say is be prepped, be prepared so that you know where the host is going to take this. So if you haven't already engaged in the show before, give it a listen. And figure out, because if you're going to be on that show, you need to be ready for questions that host is going to ask. And if you're not comfortable in that place, because again, sometimes when you're being interviewed for the first few times, at least, it almost feels like an interrogation, right? You're like, I'm being interviewed. Oh my goodness. What's George going to ask me? There's a certain comfort to it once you get in the chair, but it's even better if you have a good understanding of, oh, okay, this is the kind of show. These are the kinds of questions that the host will ask. That'll also prep you to know if that host is the kind of host that's going to throw you any curveballs. Some hosts will do that. And if you haven't prepped a little bit, then you might not know. And if you haven't prepped, you also then should know, how do you deflect or how do you move forward regardless of what questions the host throws at me?
Tough question. What's the best way to deal with an unexpected question that might even be off topic or perhaps is attacking some aspect of the guest?
Run out of the studio screaming. Okay, maybe not that. Because in the moment, it can be very uncomfortable. But I would say if you are thrown a question that you don't have the answer to, or if it's not the type of content that's in your wheelhouse, I think you have to be very assertive, not aggressive, but you have to be very assertive and say, I don't have an answer to that question. Something like that. And if it's a matter of you don't have an answer to the question, but you know you can find the information, if it's a matter of you don't have an answer to that question in the moment, but you know that you have the information or can find the information, you could say to the host, well, I don't have an answer for that question right now, but I'd love to get an answer to you. And you can share it with your audience if you like. Within the next 3 days, I'll have an answer for you. And it might not be the most appropriate answer in that moment, but at least it allows the audience and the host to know that, okay, you don't have that immediate answer, but you're going to get it. If it's content that has been, or a question that's been thrown your way, and I've had this happen, not so much to myself, but I've had it happen with clients actually who have had, they've either been guests on shows or they've had guests on their shows that go down a rabbit hole they weren't prepared to go down. That's where you can nip it in the bud and say, this is not an area of expertise for me, or I don't have any knowledge of this, or so you really need to be able to deflect that and say, I'm not prepared or I'm not comfortable to answer this line of questioning right now.
What happens, what can the guests do when they're there, they've been invited to speak about something in their business, and then the host makes a personal attack?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Personally, I've never had that. And again, we're getting in some pretty uncomfortable conversations here. So, and I know you know that. So, geez, I wonder where you're going with this, George. Again, I think being very upfront and simply saying something along the lines of, and it would depend on the attack too. I mean, I've had hosts do it in jest, where it's, because I can be a bit of a joker sometimes. So I've had hosts that will jab a little bit, and I'm okay with that as long as it's not, really, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not hurting my credibility or my brand or my business. But if it is, and again, this is where being live versus recorded makes a big difference, because if it's live, it's harder to do this. If it's recorded, you could say, George, you know what? I'm not comfortable with this line of questioning that you're going down, or I'm not really comfortable with what you just said, George. So can we tone down the rhetoric or whatever it is? Or I'm happy to be your guest, but if you're going to continue doing this, I really can't do that. If it's live, it's a little bit harder, right? And you don't want to escalate, but again, sometimes nodding and smiling, and depends on how deep the attack goes, sometimes nodding and smiling and saying, oh, George, that was cute. I love how you said that, or something that takes the conversation away from the attack, right? It reminds me of political answers, right? And I'm not saying come up with a way to know how to answer a political situation, but unless that's a type of show that you're doing or you're guesting on, and then again, you need to be prepared for that. That's a very different and very specific kind of show. But if you're asking about, George, you're asking me about podcasting questions and speaking and communication, Okay, that's my expertise. That's what I know about. If you asked me something about, the political climate of Shanghai, I could probably spitball something that would be totally inaccurate, but I'd rather get into another form of questioning or content.
What would you say, your years of experience in radio, what did you gain the most that has been most helpful for you with what you're doing with podcasting?
I think two things. Number one is the ability to think on my feet. That regardless of who I have as a guest or the episodes, the kinds of episodes I'm recording, that I can pretty much, unless I'm tired or something, I can get through the show, I can get through the episode, and it's reasonably seamless because I've been trained to think on my feet. Radio, especially when I started in radio, it was live. Nothing was recorded. So you have to be able to think on your feet and keep it going, and audio flow, and dead air is bad, and all of those things, right? So definitely being able to think on my feet and respond in the moment. But that also means keeping, if I can be a little bit revealing here, I'm holding up a piece of paper just in case, George asks me a question or I need to make reference to something. I can write it down. So far, I've been pretty good. I haven't had to write anything down, but I've got it there just in case. And I do that when I'm a guest, and I do that when I'm a host, just in case I need to make a note of something. That's number one. Number two is the ability to edit, being able to listen to, especially when the episodes were audio only, listen to my show and know that's not something I want to put out to my audience. So knowing what stays and what goes on the cutting room floor, as it were. So what stays and what are the pieces that can easily be taken out? Obviously, the things like stammers and stutters and ums, ahs, all of those things, those are, for the most part, sometimes you can't remove them all, but you remove those things. Pregnant pauses, another one that sometimes gets into podcasters' episodes when they're recording them, remove those. But then there's other things too. There's like things that the guest might say. The guest might say something that is not quite where I want to take the show. I've had guests come on my show, for example, and they try and turn a political coin, or they'll say something political. About, I'm in Ontario, they'll say something about our premier, and I'm like, you know what? I don't want that on my show. This is not a political show. So I edit that out. So the ability to edit with a critical ear, and then also make sure it's quality, high quality finished product, mixed, mastered, all of those things that I learned in broadcasting.
And Carl, I'm going to point out a technique that you use that that listeners might have missed, and that was when you're asked a question, especially if it's multiple answers to the questions. When you're answering, it's quite easy to lose your train of thought, and it's quite okay to ask the host to tell me the question again, please. Let me get back on track. That's permissible. That's okay. There's no shame in that, because we're thinking on our feet, and we're thinking, which way do we go? This way, that way, and then we go, oh, we forgot about the other branch there that I was going to answer, and that's normal. It's okay to ask the host. And Carl, I'm gonna you know that I hosted a radio show for 19 years. It was a weekly half-hour radio show, and I'll support what you said earlier. When I started, I was terrible. I don't think it was the first 10 that sucked. I think it might have been the first 20 or 25 for sure. However, I stuck with it and it got better. And one of the benefits that I gained was to be totally in the moment with the person and treat every person as an equal, regardless of how much in awe you might be, or even if that person would try to intimidate you. And no one ever tried to intimidate them, but I allowed my image of this person to intimidate me, even though they didn't intend to be intimidating. And it's important to treat everyone just as an equal person. We're just having a conversation here.
Yeah. We're just no one's better, no one's worse, no one's even when I have, and again, more when I was in radio, although I'm getting to the point in my podcasting business, I guess you could say, or career, where I am starting to interview some more higher profile people, not as high profile as, oh my goodness, I'm interviewing top world thought leaders, not quite that high profile, but higher profile even in the podcasting space. You are equal. It's a blessing for you to have them on their show. So show up with gratitude. And I'm sure they are coming in with gratitude as well and feeling that it's an honor for them to be on your show. So, and if you think of it that way and you think of it as your equals, I think that makes it easier to push down the, oh my goodness, George Torek is interviewing me. It's the best show on the planet, which it should be, right? I mean, you should love your show, and I know you do. So I shouldn't be intimidated by that, but you also shouldn't be intimidated by me and by having me as your guest, right? And I learned, this is something else I learned in radio, is because we would, every now and again, we'd have the opportunity to interview celebrities. So I've interviewed politicians, I've interviewed musicians, fairly famous ones, not the extremely famous ones, but certainly famous within the genres that I worked in. So it is a big deal when you get to interview Sheryl Crow, or you get to interview, I also worked a lot in country, by the way. So you get to interview Paul Brandt and a number of other Canadian country artists that would walk through the station all the time. You get to interview them. They're no better. They put their pants on the same way. You know what I mean? So it's that going in with that attitude of they're just people. They're just people. And they just want to be people, just like you're a person. So allow yourself to come at it equally.
And I've noticed that most people, even successful people, just want to be treated as another person. They just want to be treated, every once in a while there's a jerk, but most people, they just want to be treated as a person. And the more you treat them as an equal, the more they will open up to you and treat you as an equal. They know you're not attacking. They know you're not worshiping. You're simply having a conversation. And Carl, in your years of radio, what did you find most frustrating about that?
Oh, the money. If you haven't heard, there's a reason why people look at WKRP and it literally was town to town, up and down the dial, and you're working for peanuts and stuff like that. But I think the most frustrating thing, aside from you could never make enough money in radio unless you really made it to the big leagues, which I never did. I mean, had some great opportunities, worked with some phenomenal programmers and other broadcasters across the country. But I think the most frustrating thing would be in radio, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. It's almost like being at an airport and you go through security and you're getting through it and you're stressed. You're giving yourself all this time to get through security, only to have to wait another 2 hours because the security line was not as busy as you thought it would be. Or now it's all kiosks. So you went through the kiosk. It was quick. And you're like, well, now I'm waiting for 2 hours. So I always found that the frustrating thing was you're working on what we call bits, those little pieces of the talk breaks between songs. We call them bits in the radio world. Anyways, you're working on a bit and you're like, I want to get this to the air. I want to get it to the air right away. And you got to wait for the song to finish, or you have to wait for the news to finish or the commercial break. And you practiced it and you're like, it's going to be perfect. I've got the delivery down and there's your chance, and you've practiced it, and then you're ready to go, and something screws up. You forget to turn on the mic, or it doesn't come out the way that you wanted to. You almost wanted to do it when you were ready to do it, but you had to wait. So I always found that frustrating in the moment, to have to wait to do the bits that I was ready to do 5 minutes earlier. I don't know if you experienced that, George, in radio, but I think that if you have, the feeling. You're like, I practiced this.
You've got it ready. Come on. Why can't I go now? Come on. I've got the line ready. Come on. I got to wait. There's a commercial.
Yeah.
And your mention of bits reminds me of bites, and in particular sound bites. And if you're impressive guest, other than the interview itself, there might be sound bites that show up elsewhere, perhaps in a news piece. So how does one craft and deliver a sound bite?
Oh, wow. Are we talking radio or podcasting or in general?
Well, probably in general, because I imagine it applies in both cases. Because podcasting, we're now putting these reels up.
Yeah, so firstly, in radio, I'll give you the radio answer, then I'll give you the podcasting answer. It's essentially the same, but in radio, you'd find them a lot in the news, and they're called actualities. That's what they're called. They're called actualities. I don't know if you knew that, but they're called actualities. Those little snippets where you would say, something in the news, let's go to reporter George Torok, or George Torok has more with this story. That whole thing, that's called an actuality. So it's almost like a full version of the story. Well, that way you're not having to read the whole story. How do you find it? Well, what's nice is when you work in the radio world, all of that is usually provided for you. But if you're carving up an interview and you're looking for the meat of the story, that's really where it parallels with podcasting, is you're looking for the meat, right? You're looking for that juicy little tidbit of information that answers the question. It answers the questions, what, why, where, how. So in a news story, it could be something as simple as, and there's going to be a rally today at City Hall, or some kind of a celebration. And organizer George Torok is expecting a large crowd. And then I play a clip with George Torok saying, over 5,000 people have registered to show up at this event, and we're really excited. It's going to be great weather, and don't forget your sunscreen. I'm just picking this out of the air, as you can see. And then there's usually a tag out. It's almost the same thing with finding a snippet or a clip or a sound bite from a podcast interview. What is something that the guest has said that resonates with you, or is enough of I'll say the word tease, is enough of a tease that gives the audience enough, I want to find out more about that. So, by the way, what do we do with these bites? Well, we're finding them now in audio, not audiograms. We are finding them there too, but we're finding them in reels and shorts. And the original way that people would do it in podcasting was in audiograms. And the way I create audiograms is usually the same way I would create the news stories. It's like, coming up on this show, George Torok reveals the number one thing you need to know about, success on the platform. And there's 10 seconds or 15 seconds of magic from George, but I'm only going to give 80% of that. The 20% is the sweet sauce that's in the episode that now you have to go listen to. And there's a tag out, usually with an audiogram, listen to the show, give it a listen, give it a rating, that kind of stuff. But that's how you really look for those magical moments. And I think and I'm glad you asked this question, because it's one of the things that some podcasters will struggle with, because they'll use technology and they'll say, if I just throw this in XYZ program, it'll carve out all of my sound bites for me, and then I just throw them up there. The problem is, are they the right sound bites? And you know what? They aren't always the right sound bites. So this way it gives you the opportunity to decide, okay, that is the right sound bite. That one, not so much. So I definitely would say check to be sure, because they're not all created equally, especially if you're relying on technology to carve out those sound bites for you. But the old school way was to go and listen and find, that's the magic one. Cut it. Literally, back in the day, we would cut it with tape, but literally you snip it, you copy it, whatever. It's a separate file. And then you can do something else with it, a reel, an audiogram, a short, something like that.
And Carl, funny you mention it. I do remember going through a tape and cutting out the pieces a long time ago. And boy,
snip.
That was a slow process.
You get pretty quick at it after a while, I have to say.
Carl, for people to like to know more about podcast solutions made simple, who's that for, and what can you help them solve?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we try to do is eliminate the barriers of entry into podcasting. We've come up with 5 of them, the top 2 ones being time and money. And our goal is to help you get there and understand that, yes, obviously it's an investment in your time and it's a financial investment too, but we want to help you be seen as the go-to expert. We want to help you elevate your brand, your business, and your credibility, especially if you are a subject matter expert in real estate or speaking, coaching, consulting, any of those areas. And you know that the level up used to be, George, the level up would be, it's time to write a book and go on a book tour. And now it's time to, if you're still doing that, do that. But now it's also time to be a podcaster and have a show that showcases your expertise, your IP, all of that stuff. So that's what we help people do. We help them elevate their brand, business, their credibility. They're probably really busy. They don't have the technical savvy to figure out how to do it on their own. So we're there to help them not only launch their shows, but maintain them. So a guy like you, George, can focus on your business while we're helping you be seen as the go-to expert.
Podcast Solutions Made Simple, and you can find that link in the description below. Carl, as we prepare to wrap up, if you're imagine you're sitting with a prospective guest for whether it's a podcast or even radio, and you're sitting in the waiting room with them, and you've got a chance to give them 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice just before they go on the air, what would that be?
Excellent question. I would say, number 1, be yourself. Nobody else can be you but you. Don't try and emulate or try and be somebody else. That's number 1. Number 2, I would say, is bring your A game. Bring the best version of you. You mentioned this earlier, George. You mentioned about focus and being in the zone when you need to be in the zone. So that's a chance for you to be in the zone. And if there's a third thing, it would be have fun doing it. Podcasting was always supposed to be fun, or being on radio. I love radio. If I could still be in it, I would be. There are so many things I'd rather not do, like dig a ditch, versus being in radio. So understand that if you have that opportunity, there's always an element of fun in it, and have fun doing it for sure.
My guest today is Carl Richards, and I think I'll repeat that last bit of advice. Have fun doing it. If you like what you heard, tell your friends and post your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, because that helps more listeners find us. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.